we are still looking at solving quadratics. We are applying those quadratics to sort of real life problems. Now, this was the equation that you were using yesterday. This is a pretty simple equation. But if you launch an object, open your notes up to the inside, when you launch an object, do you see that the equation just got more complicated? Because it now has this term right here because of the initial velocity, the initial push that you gave the object. That's why that extra term is there. Now, this graph on this page, it looks like the one on the other page. You see that? This one's wrong. If I throw a ball up in the air, if I throw it up, is it going to fall straight down? If the field goal kicker kicks the ball, what's he going to do? It's going to go up and then go down. So we have to fix this graph. This is not correct. It's going to go up and then it's going to go down. This part right here is not correct. So would you fix that on your notes right here? This is not on the first page. This is on the second page of your notes. The second graph is incorrect. Okay, in order to save a little bit of time, we are going to skip to example number 2. Would you please skip to example number 2? Standing on a cliff 192 feet, the diver jumps up and out with a velocity of 64 feet per second to avoid hitting the rocks. Please do not jump off of cliffs that have rocks. That's not safe. This is not an example of something you ought to do. Just say. Okay. So, here we have our equation. What does this stand for? The height that he starts with. What is the height that he starts with? 192. What does the V stand for? Initial velocity. He's got a push here to get started. So what is his initial velocity? This is due to gravity. The 16 is in there due to gravity because no matter how high he jumps, the gravity is going to pull him down. And so the h of t stands for his ending amount. Where does he end up? Well, he hits the water. If he hits the water, how high is he above the water? So, that is the equation that we're going to need to solve. There are 3 ways that we've learned to solve an equation. We can solve by factoring, we can solve by the quadratic formula, or we can solve by completing the square. Now, if you remember that either the pink or the gold paper, when we were completing the square, on all the problems we gave you, when you were completing the square, the A was equal to 1. Because it gets a lot more complicated to complete the square if that number is not 1. The easiest way to solve something is to factor if it will factor. So let's try factoring first. Does it have a GCF? What do you think it is? What do you think the GCF is? 4 is a factor, but it is not the GCF on this particular problem. The GCF is 16, and since this is negative, I'm going to factor out a negative 16 because it confuses me to have a negative sign here. So if I factor out a 16, 64 divided by 16, this will be a negative 4 because I factored out a negative. And this would be a negative 12. Now, once again, if it doesn't factor, you have to use the quadratic formula. All right, and so we multiply the first number times the last number and write down the factors of 12, negative 12. Would those factors add up to the negative 4? And so 0 equals negative 16, t plus 2, t minus 6, using my shortcut factoring. I'm solving for t. Another name for solving is zeros, because the way you solve this is you put it equal to 0. The 16 can't equal 0. And you solve this and get 2 answers. But I have to throw this answer out because the diver cannot go backwards in time. It's going to take him 6 seconds to hit the water on his dive. Got it? Now, he is going to start up here at 192. He's going to jump, and he's going to go down here and hit the water. And so it's asking for the maximum height. Before I can figure out the maximum height, by the way, we called that point, isn't that the vertex point of my parabola? I'm looking for the vertex point. Before I can find the maximum height, I'm going to have to find the time. What form is that in, by the way? Standard form. It's in standard form, and I need to find the vertex. Do I already know how to find the vertex in standard form? Except instead of using this variable h that I have up here on the board, this h up here did not stand for the height. It stood for the first part of the vertex. In this formula, that is represented by the t. So using my vertex formula that I had before, but applying it to this variable, the t is going to be equal to minus b over 2a. So what's the b? 64 minus 64 over 2a. That's going to be minus 64 divided by minus 32, so that's going to be a positive 2 seconds. It's going to take him 2 seconds to get to that maximum point. But that's not what the question asked. What did the question ask? So now I have to plug that 2 in. Now, I've seen a lot of order of operation mistakes at this point, so go ahead and put this in your calculator just like this so that there will not be an order of operation mistake. So what number did you get? The height, 2 seconds after he starts the dive, is 256. Is it seconds? I started to write seconds. Is it supposed to be seconds? 256 feet. He's going to be way up there. At what time was the diver at height of 202 feet. So now we are going to ask, when is this diver at 202 feet? What time? So we're solving for t. And this 202 is our height that we're trying to calculate. In order to solve this, I'm going to either have to factor or use the quadratic formula. Either way, it has to be equal to 0 to start with. So I am going to subtract this 202 from both sides of the equation, because to solve it, I need it in standard form. That will not factor. What is choice B if it will not factor? Quadratic formula. This is going to be the A, the B, and the C. And I wrote the quadratic formula over there on the sideboard. It was also on your pink paper because you were supposed to be practicing the quadratic formula. Except right here on the quadratic formula, I changed it from an x to a t, because in our equation where we usually have an x, we have the letter t. So time equals minus b plus or minus b squared. 64 squared is this number right here. Minus 4 times A times C. Did you check this number out for me? Is that the correct number? 4 times A times C. Now, we are not going to simplify this number, because I can't find negative 64 plus or minus some radical number divided by negative 32 on my watch. Because of the context of the problem, it does not make any sense to simplify this problem. What I am going to do is decimalize this part right here. Square root of 4096 minus 640. I put that in my calculator and got a decimal number. So t equals minus 64 plus or minus 58.788, all divided by the negative 32. Where did the square root go? I put it in the calculator and figured out what decimal number it's equal to. So the time equals negative 64 plus 58.788 divided by negative 32. Or the time equals minus 64 minus 58.788 divided by negative 32. That's what the plus minus means. I'm going to add the 58 and I'm going to subtract the 58. By the way, if you're putting this in your calculator, you will want to put parentheses around that, or you will not get the right answer. So this first answer, I am rounding to 3 decimal places because that's what the instructions ask me to do. Or that's what the instructions on the homework ask me to do. So I'm going ahead and doing that in the notes. 0.38737. Just put those in my calculator. Now, This time both of the answers are positive. There's not an answer to throw away because both of them are, how can I have two answers? Here's a little sketch of what happened. He starts at 192 and he jumps up and then he goes down. So somewhere right here is the height 202 that we were looking at in this problem. He's going to go to 202 on his way up. He's going to go up past it and come down, and he's going to have another 202 height. Do you see why there are two answers to this problem? Because this first answer, the smallest time, is when he's jumping up, and that's when he's going down. Next, we're going to do problem number 3, but would you please make a change in problem number 3? Do you see where it has that number 138? Please change 138 to 128. George kicks the football with an initial velocity of 128 feet per second. When will the ball hit the ground? So we're going to use this formula, and so h of t equals negative 16t squared plus, what's the initial velocity? 128. What's the initial height? Where's he kicking the ball from? It's on the ground. So what's the initial height? And what's the final height? Where is it going to land? On the ground. So what's the final height? Starts on the kick the ball, the field goal guy kicks the ball. Is it on the ground to start with? Is it going to end up on the ground to start with? And so why do I have two equal signs in this problem? Because I wrote the wrong sign right there. That was the plus sign right there. It's not supposed to have two equal signs in the same problem. Okay, so how are we going to solve this? Since this is plus 0 down here, we don't really need that 0. And so the easiest way to solve this, I believe, is to factor. And so I am going to factor out a negative 16t. And that's going to give me t minus 8. 16 will go into 128 8 times. And this can be equal to 0, and this can be equal to 0. So t equals 0 seconds, and t equals 8 seconds. It's on the ground to start with at 0 seconds. It takes 8 seconds to hit the ground again. I solved it by factoring. Part B. When will the ball be at 112 feet above the ground? 112 equals negative 16t squared plus 128t plus 0. This is the initial velocity. This is the initial height. In order to solve it, either by factoring or by the quadratic formula, I need to have it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 112. The easiest way to solve it is to factor. Does 16 go into 112? Can I factor out a negative 16? 128 divided by 16 would give me an 8t right here. 112 divided by 16 would give me a -7 here. Is that going to factor? What are the factors of 7? It's not going to factor because that's negative. Ah, I made a sign mistake. Can you find my sign mistake? I made 2 sign mistakes. What kind of 16 was I factoring out? Negative. So what does that do to those signs? If I factor out a negative, that's going to be negative. If I factor out a negative, that's going to be positive. Thank goodness. Now it's going to factor. Because the factors of 7 are 1 and 7. Will that add up to -8? And multiply to get -7. So getting worried there for a minute. T minus 1, t minus 7. The 16 cannot give you an answer. T equals 1, t equals 8. Yes, I miscopied it from the previous board, didn't I? Why are there 2 answers? Because the ball is going to start on the ground and go down to the ground again, and it'll hit 112 1 second after the kick, and again over here 7 seconds after the kick. When does the ball reach its maximum height? Can you figure that out for me? T equals minus b over 2a. First you have to find the time, and then you have to find the height. And so this is going to be minus 128 over -32. Do you know where I got a -32? 2 times -16 would be -32. Then you are going to plug in the 4. First, you find the time, and then you find the maximum height. I don't think he can kick it 768 feet high. Do you? Okay. So, oh, that was this part D. I already did part D. What was the answer there? 768 feet. And this will be due on, this buff color one will be due on Friday. So I believe several of you caught my mistake. What was my mistake? This is what? Negative. I didn't put that negative in my calculator. If I do not put that negative in my calculator, do I get the right answer? I did not. What was the right answer? 256 is a much more reasonable answer. And so this would be 256 for the height. So thank you for that correction.